There is a moment in your day that looks insignificant, but quietly controls more than you realize. Not when you're working, not when you're earning, not even when you're spending. It happens in silence, right before you sleep. Most people treat that moment like an ending, but it's not. It's a handoff. What you carry into that moment is what gets processed next. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Most people go to sleep holding the exact thing they are trying to escape. Debt, pressure, numbers that don't add up. You lie down, and your body is tired. But your mind? Still calculating. You replay expenses, shift numbers around, try to make things fit. But it never fits. So eventually, you stop thinking. Not because the problem is solved, but because your body gives up. And then, you sleep. But what you don't realize is this. You didn't just fall asleep. You submitted a signal. And that signal carries into what comes next. That's why the next day often looks like the last one. Same pressure, same constraints, same invisible ceiling. And after a while, it starts to feel like that's just your life. But it's not your life. It's a pattern. And patterns can be interrupted. Now here's where most people go wrong. They try to fix money during the day. They focus on earning more, saving, better, cutting expenses, all useful, all logical, but incomplete. Because money doesn't just respond to action, it responds to structure. And structure is set before action begins. That's why two people can do the same things and get completely different results. One is working inside alignment, and the other is working against it. And the difference often comes down to something as small as what happens before sleep. Now stay with me, because this is where it gets deeper. There is an understanding that has existed for thousands of years that most modern thinking has completely ignored. It says, debt is not just something you owe. It's something that restricts flow, not metaphorically, practically. When pressure builds inside a system, flow reduces. And once flow reduces, everything downstream starts to tighten. That's why you can work harder and still feel stuck. Because effort doesn't fix restriction. Only alignment does. And here's the part that most people never hear. There are specific ways to remove that restriction. Not by forcing money in, but by releasing what's blocking it. And one of the most precise methods happens at night. Not randomly, not occasionally, specifically. There is a sequence, and at the center of that sequence is something most people think they already understand. But they don't, because they've only seen it on the surface. The words are familiar, too familiar, which is why people underestimate them. But when used correctly, they stop being words. They become direction. The passage is simple. You've probably heard it before. But hearing it and using it properly are not the same thing. Because most people read it for comfort. But it wasn't written for comfort. It was written from a place of lack and certainty at the same time. And that combination is rare, because most people only feel certain when they already have something. But this was different. See, this was a declaration made before anything changed. And that's what gives it power, because it sets the pattern before the outcome appears. Now think about that. Most people wait for their situation to improve before they feel stable. This reverses it. You establish stability first. Then the situation adjusts. That's the shift. And it doesn't happen during the day. It happens right before sleep. Because that's when your system is most open and least resistant. But here's the part most people miss. It's not enough to say something once One repetition doesn't override a pattern. Patterns are built through repetition, so they must be interrupted through repetition, and not randomly, specifically. There's a number tied to this, not by coincidence, by design. 7. Now don't dismiss that, because 7 shows up in systems that have nothing to do with each other, yet follow the same structure. Completion, cycles, reset points. 7 signals something has reached its end and is ready to be replaced. That's why repetition matters. Each time you repeat, you're not just saying words, you're pushing against the existing pattern until it gives way. Now imagine this. Instead of going to sleep with pressure, you sit up, you pause, you become intentional, and you replace the last signal of your day with something structured, not rushed, not emotional, deliberate. You say it once. Nothing changes. You say it twice. Still feels the same. By the third time, your mind starts to slow down. By the fourth, your breathing shifts. By the fifth, the tension begins to release. So by the sixth, your focus sharpens. And by the seventh, something locks in. Not emotionally, structurally. Because now, your system has received a new pattern, and that pattern is what gets carried forward. This is where things begin to shift. Not instantly, not dramatically, but noticeably. Because now, you're no longer reinforcing the same loop. You've introduced a different signal, and that signal changes what happens next. But here's where most people stop too early. They think the words alone are enough. They're not, because words without alignment don't hold. They fade. There's a second layer. And this is where the real shift happens. Before you speak anything, you have to decide something. Not emotionally, structurally. And you have to decide, what flows through me is not just for me. That's the shift. Because the moment everything becomes about holding, flow stops. And when flow stops, pressure builds. So before the words comes the decision. Then comes the repetition. Then comes the timing. And when all three align, something opens. Not visibly at first, but consistently. Small things begin to move. Unexpected relief. Opportunities that weren't there before. Expenses that don't hit the same way. It doesn't feel like magic. It feels like things are finally loosening. Because they are. The restriction is reducing. And once that happens, flow returns. Slowly. Then steadily. Then naturally. And the most interesting part? It doesn't feel forced. Because it's not. You didn't push harder. You aligned differently. And alignment always outperforms force. Final close. If you've been carrying pressure, night after night, thinking nothing is changing, you're not stuck. You've just been repeating the same pattern, at the same moment, every single day. And that moment is the one that matters most. So tonight, don't rush into sleep. Pause. Sit up. Be intentional. And replace the signal you've been sending with something stronger. Not once, 7 times. Because patterns don't break with effort. They break with precision. And once the pattern shifts, everything else begins to follow.